Welcome to the Built with Grace podcast, and thanks for joining us on our study, God Shows Up, a study on God's timing. God's timing is always perfect, but not always comfortable. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review and share this with your friends. This helps us get the word out to more people. Also, leave your email address if you would like information on upcoming study guides. Chapter 9 God Shows Up When You Feel Outnumbered. God's Sighting. When you feel outnumbered by the enemy, don't look at the enemy, look at your God. It was 1980. The world looked on as the Lake Placid, New York Winter Olympics were held. While there were several notable performances by some of the world's best athletes, one event defined the Olympics that year. It was coined the Miracle on Ice and chosen as the athletic event of the century by Sports Illustrated. Two teams sat ready in the locker rooms, ready to begin medal round play in ice hockey. In one locker room sat the highly favored defending champion Soviet Union. Composed largely of professional hockey players, the Soviets had won 5 of the previous 6 Olympic gold medals in ice hockey. In the other locker room sat a bunch of amateur hockey players, many of whom were hockey or college players, and only a few had any experience in international play. It was the ultimate mismatch. One team highly favored, the other one not even expected to make it as far as they had. Yet to everyone's surprise, this group of kids defeated the mighty Soviets and went on to claim the gold medal for the USA. We've all had those times when we've looked at the task ahead of us and felt like those kids must have felt in that locker room that day. They were in a position no one in the world expected them to be in, but they were. There was no logical reason they could get there, but they did. There was no way they could win against a far more experienced team from the Soviet Union, but they did. Have you ever felt that way? Felt like you were in a losing situation with no logical way out? You look at the bills and the money in the bank and realize that there's no way you'll be able to make ends meet? You lie awake at night wondering where your kids are and what they're doing, but realize they have to make their own decisions. You see your marriage deteriorating before your eyes and have no idea how or desire to carry on. That addiction you've been praying about still has you in its grip, and you are too ashamed to look for help or no idea where to start. You look at the social, political, and economic issues facing our world, and you lose hope. Well, here's some good news. As human beings, we tend to have a soft spot in our hearts for the underdog, and so apparently does God. James MacDonald states, "You'll face overwhelming odds, you'll be incredibly outnumbered, fear would have be your natural inclination, but keep in mind, God is with you." God doesn't always use conventional means to rescue his people. For example, he doesn't rely on the most faithful followers, as seen in the story of Abraham, a man God called his friend, even though he tried twice to hand off his wife as his sister to save himself, and decided to take actions into his own hands when God didn't fulfill his promises in Abraham's time frame. His actions aren't dictated by the environment, as we saw with Moses in the crossing of the Red Sea. How does one explain how, as the Egyptians closed in, the water separated just long enough for his people to cross and then returned to its normal spot as the Egyptians tried to cross? God doesn't follow human rational thought, as we saw with Joshua when he watched Jericho's mighty walls fall down in a heap as a result of the Israelites marching around the city blowing horns and shouting. God isn't impressed by human strength, as seen in the battle between David and Goliath. There's no rational reason that a young man who was only trusted to watch a bunch of sheep could go up against a highly trained soldier and drop him with a single stone. By the way, did you know that why David chose 5 stones? Tradition says the other 4 were for Goliath's brothers, but they didn't show up. God doesn't seek out the most loyal followers, as seen in the story of a man named Samson, who to his dying day only thought of himself and his own passions, yet was instrumental in a huge victory for the people of God. God doesn't look at the size and the resources of your enemy, as seen in the story of Gideon, who went into battle hugely outnumbered and saw God win the battle with a small army that was proficient at blowing horns and breaking clay pitchers with candles in them. That's in Judges 7. And God sees things we don't see when we enter the battle, as we see in the story of Elisha and his servant. Elisha was a prophet of God, and like most prophets in his day, he wouldn't have won any popularity contests. Prophets of God were famous for upsetting the people and the kings of Israel, the enemies, and in some cases all of the above. In 2 Kings chapter 6, Elisha was given the task of keeping the king of Israel informed of the plans of an enemy army. Time and again, he would get a message from God and relay it to the king, thus thwarting the plans of the enemy to ambush the Israelites. Ambush, by the way, is the enemy of our soul's favorite weapon. One night, after finding out where Elisha was staying, the enemy king surrounded the village and waited for daylight. You can find the story in 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 8 through 23. When Elisha's servant woke up and went out on the balcony of the place they were staying, he looked up to the hills and saw the huge military force surrounding the village. 2 Kings 6:15 says, when the servant of the man of God got up and went out early in the morning, and the army saw the army with horses and chariots that surrounded the city. "Oh no, my lord," he called. "What shall we do?" I've often wondered why God chose to inform Elisha about the enemy king's plans this time, when the enemy king couldn't have a quiet conversation in his bedroom without Elisha knowing about it. This is from 2 Kings chapter 6, 11 and 12. The fact that the king of Israel seemed to know his plans, enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, "Tell me, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel?" "None of us, my lord the king," said his officers. But Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. That's got to be scary. Was God keeping the information from Elisha as a surprise, or did he tell Elisha, but Elisha didn't think an enemy army surrounding the village was a big deal to be concerned about? For whatever the reason, Elisha didn't seem to share the same concern that his servant did. It wasn't that Elisha had confidence in his own military prowess, or that he knew a few soldiers guarding Dothan would be able to handle the militia waiting outside the city. Elisha knew an important principle for dealing with battles in life. He knew that being brave against the opposition is about trusting a God that is bigger than your enemy. Physical sight is limited, but spiritual sight opens a whole new avenue of confidence for us when we serve a sovereign God. So here's what to remember. Conflict is inevitable. While the servant was surprised by the ensuing conflict, Elisha didn't seem to be. He knew an important principle each of us should know, and that is that conflict is inevitable. Some in Christian circles believe that if you are in a struggle, it means that you aren't living right. On the contrary, sometimes our struggle is proof that we are doing exactly what is right. Jesus says, "What blessings await you when people hate you and exclude you and mock you and curse you as evil because you follow the Son of Man." When that happens, be happy. Yes, leap for joy, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, their ancestors treated the ancient prophets that same way. During the reign of Nero, the Roman emperor known for using Christians as human torches, Peter writes, "Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trials you're going through as if something strange were happening to you. Never forget, Satan, the enemy of our souls, is out to destroy us. It's not a question of if, but when we'll be under attack." The second thing Elisha knew was that this wasn't his battle to fight, and often the battles we're in aren't ours either. The prophet Zechariah encourages the discouraged Zerubbabel by reminding him, and Zechariah 4:6, "Then he said to me, 'This is what the Lord says to Zerubbabel. It is not by force nor by strength, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of heaven's armies.'" What we see as our enemy is often not our enemy at all. Paul reminds us in Ephesians 6:12 that we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world. Again, mighty powers in this dark world and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Quite often, the battles we have in relationships, finances, social and political issues, and health concerns are attempts by the enemy of our souls to pull our attention away from the love and grace of God and place it on an enemy that has already been defeated. If he can get us to think about that our victory will only come from our strength, if he can get us in a situation where we realize our strength will never be enough, he has us right where he wants us. This, by the way, is true whether our situation is self-inflicted or the result of a random attack. Regardless of how you got where you are, it won't be by your power that you're able to rise up and defeat the situation. That brings up another lesson we can learn from Elisha when we feel overwhelmed, outnumbered, and doomed. It's a simple lesson to learn, but a hard one to live. Theology doesn't always mesh well with practicality. The lesson is simple to remember and hard to live out. Ready? Here it is. God has your back. When Elisha's servant comes running to him with the news of the enemy surrounding them, Elisha answered, "Don't be afraid, for there are more on our side than on theirs." At this point, I'm guessing Elijah's servant, if he were like me anyway, would look at Elisha himself and a few poorly armed people in the street and think, "What have you been smoking, Elisha? Did you see the enemy? Did you look at the resources they have? We're doomed. There is no logical way out of this." Then Elisha prayed and asked God to give his servant spiritual eyesight. Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. The servant saw a roadblock, but Elisha simply saw an obstacle. The servant saw a problem to solve. Elisha saw an opportunity to see God work. The servant felt his own inadequacy. Elisha rested in God's sovereignty. Rationally and physically speaking, both Elisha and his servant saw the same thing. The hills were indeed full of enemy soldiers armed and ready to take Elisha captive. There was no time or no way to call for reinforcements. The difference was one of attitude, outlook, and spiritual vision. So what are you afraid of today? What enemy is surrounding you with no hope of escape? You may not seem strong, but it's not about your strength. You may be haunted by your past, but it's not about your actions. You may see a formidable foe before you, a situation that is unexpected and leaving you in fear, but fear is often God's call to trust him more deeply. My prayer for us today is that in each conflict we will have our eyes open to the promises of a loving, sovereign God that has given us. Your biggest enemies are the ones you can't see. Your hope of victory is in the unseen soldiers of a godly army. Remember, when you feel outnumbered by the enemy, don't look at the enemy, look at your God. Thanks for listening to this edition of God Shows Up. I hope it's been an encouragement to you in your walk with Jesus. Please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, as this will increase our listenership. And reach out to me by email if you have any questions or prayer requests. Thanks again for listening, and have a blessed day.